So today I'm doing an in-depth review of the Gate Pulsar D2 HPA engine. This engine was actually released last year, and while similar to the previous Pulsar D engine, it features a small number of upgrades that could be significant. The D2, while similar looking to the D1, can be recognized by the indication on the side. Before the Pulsar engines, the manufacturing company Gate Electronics spent a number of years developing the Titan FCU for AGs. It's this same FCU that has been repurposed for HPA engine use, giving us a modern app-based user interface. The engine can be bought either as a standalone upgrade for around €350 or as an engine with the FCU for around €500. The former option gives people the possibility of upgrading without buying a second Titan FCU, in case they already have an older Pulsar engine with an FCU. The Pulsar D2 has a number of core features. Settings are adjusted via a Bluetooth app on the phone, and the engine is rated for a rate of fire up to around 40 rounds per second and a velocity of up to 650 FPS. It takes normal AEG nozzles, allowing you to use your existing nozzle from your AEG. And it's a dual solenoid setup, meaning the firing cycle and nozzle cycle are separate operations. The Pulsar D2 has a fair amount of accessories included. First, you get 5 different nozzles with it, made in different lengths. That's a nice move, and it can come in handy even if you have an existing nozzle to use. You also get a bunch of stickers and patches. Okay. There's also a weirdly shaped key, which is required to disassemble the engine for maintenance. You get a screw-in hose, but there's no QD plug included, so you'll need to buy your own. I use the Hang Tactical one that's also available in my store, and it worked fine. You also get some stickers for the selector plate and some spare O-rings for the engine. During the installation, I found that the cylinder alignment holes were too short, and I had to grind them up to fit the engine. That may not be the same issue for you, depending on what gearbox you use. Or maybe it could have been caused by the following issue with the tappet plate, because the screw holding the tappet plate will actually force it into a wrong position. The solution was to thread lock it in a position further out, as once the engine is installed, the screw is no longer needed anyway, because the gearbox itself will hold the tappet plate like normal. Other than that, the install is straightforward. You install the Titan like normal. This means removing all the things not needed, cleaning up the gearbox, and installing the white sticker on the tappet plate here on the back of it. The secondary wire has to go over the board instead. Take care how you do this, as the tappet plate sits right here and will be moving during operation. You can also use the original spring guide as well, there's no need to cut it down. For the nozzle, you install the engine and push the hop-up chamber against the gearbox. There should be a slight pushback, like 1 millimeter at most. If there's no resistance or too much, then you can try one of the different nozzle lengths. So you can also with good reason use the Gate Tactical. I've installed one with mine, and it gives a little click that is otherwise missing with the optical sensors. Setting up the Pulsar D2 is not too complex. The first time you connect with the app to the Titan, there's a quick setup for the sensors and trigger. The stock settings will work fine. The most important factor is that the main valve time, this controls how much air is let into the barrel during firing. If this is set too low, the engine will not fire in a stable manner. The default setting of 6 ms seems to work fine for most setups. Do consider that with longer barrels, heavier BBs, or in cold weather especially, you will need to increase this setting. If you want to toy around more with the settings, here's my explanation of them. Operation mode. This changes between open bowl and closed bowl. Mind you, this is not really open bowl, as the nozzle is always sitting forward in this system. It just switches around so the engine fires before loading. The closed bowl mode is supposed to be more accurate, but I did not see any difference during my testing. Main valve pause determines how long time the system waits before pulling back the nozzle. Adding time here allows for a longer barrel or heavier BB to properly accelerate before losing pressure. Nozzle valve time, with the factory setting of 15 milliseconds, is how long time the air solenoid for the nozzle is engaged. The higher the setting, the longer time the nozzle is pulled back. This can help with feeding, but will also increase the maximum rate of fire that can be achieved. Also, I experienced that setting it too high would actually cause double loading of shots. Why? I don't know. I suggest to keep it at the stock setting. The nozzle valve pulse offset setting adds an extra delay after the tappet time is over, before firing the main valve. Increasing this setting gives more time for the nozzle to load a BB before firing. This could be rather critical to fine-tune with heavy BBs or strong mags. In my testing, I again found the factory setting to work fine. I imagine that if you use magazines with stiff springs, increasing this can help stability. Rate of fire is self-explanatory. Set it to limit the RPS. However, depending on the above settings combined, you may not be able to achieve your intended rate of fire, and the system won't actually show that. It's possible to set it to 40 rounds a second and only get 30 rounds a second effectively when you shoot. Further down are the anti-stiction settings. These allow you to set a timer that, when reached, increases the main valve time a little bit. It's typical that the pneumatic parts, especially in cold, stick a little more when they haven't been fired for a while, so this setting helps counter that. Moving on to the non-HPA settings of the Titan itself, we find the typical FCU settings. Fire modes allow setting things like semi-only, burst, binary, ramping. I tried the ramping mode and it's quite simple. It just switches into full auto firing after a few trigger pulls. There's no progressive ramping as seen in paintball markers. Playing with the Pulsar D2, I found some interesting points. I experienced that even a slight cold change, say from 25 degrees to 10 degrees Celsius, would turn a working engine non-working. This was because of the main valve stem being more sticky and cold. Increasing the dwell for this setting solved the issue. Testing different hop-up rubbers and pressures, I found that this engine was much more like an AG. Switching from say 80 psi up to 130 psi would significantly increase the amount of backspin, more than what's observed in other engines. I found that the 4U bucking was a good middle solution that would work up to around 0.36 or 0.40 depending on pressure. I tested also concave hop-ups like the MR hop, and while they could lift heavier BBs, they were not as stable in the middle range. On the other end, a completely stock bucking like for example a G&G Green was much more stable, but did not have enough lift for heavier BBs. All this indicates that the effective pressure going through the valve is much lower than other engines, leading to a softer shot. That's a good thing. I tested the engine in a mostly stock G&G AG, the only changes being a 4UAD bucking and a 603 inner barrel. The hop-up wasn't upgraded or changed otherwise. So this is a pretty good representation of an out-of-box engine experience. The tree here is about 80 meters away and I'm shooting 1.5 joule with .32s. Some spread can be seen, but this is also attributed to my standing position and the magnification of the camera. You should pay attention to the grouping of each burst. This is quite decent and I will be happy to play with it. Switching to .36 gives a significant increase as usual with HPA. But overall, this shooting test was not optimal, and I'd like to provide a better one for you guys in the next video. For comparison, here is the exact same G&G replica with the internals switched back to AG. The AG version is still more consistent than HPA, which is not unusual. Now we move on to something significantly more complex. The solenoids are two MAC bullet valves rated for 5 volt each. They're quite common in airsoft HPA engines. They don't have MAC written on them, but the product code's MATS. Perhaps it was specially made by MAC for Gate. They are also rated for up to 200 psi. When the nozzle solenoid activates, it directs air from a center line down here and into a piston nozzle chamber. This pushes the nozzle back. Then when the nozzle solenoid is turned off, air flows back out of the nozzle piston chamber and out through this top outlet on the right side up here. So that's an action completely separate from the main valve system. Inside the piston nozzle chamber, we find the piston for the nozzle. This is what sticks out of the engine and pulls back the tappet plate and nozzle. Disassembling the front part, we can see a spring underneath. This spring helps with pushing the main valve stem back in place after a shot. Now here it gets a bit more complex to understand the airflow. From this big hole here in the top, the main air comes in. That air source sits in front of the main valve stem, this part here. When the solenoid valve is activated, It directs air in behind the main valve stem through this little hole here behind it. That then pushes the main valve stem out. When it reaches past this edge here, the main air sitting in front of it can flow around it in through these small holes and into the nozzle and barrel. Notice it has 2 rings of holes. The first ring has only 1 hole, and the second ring has 6 holes. The idea is that a little bit of air pressure goes through the first hole as it reaches the edge first, which gives a soft acceleration of the BB before the main pressure comes in. It's debatable if this works in practice. I would say that this engine shoots very well, so perhaps yes, but I would think that both rows of holes are open so fast that the difference is tiny. Then when the solenoid shuts off, the air pressure behind the main valve stem drops, allowing the spring to push it back in. The spring, combined with the main air pressure, then keeps it shut. This main valve is interesting. How this part functions relates to the main valve time. As I mentioned before, it has 2 roles that should facilitate softer BB acceleration. This shows Gauge acknowledging and trying to improve this general issue with HPA engines, so that's positive and interesting. This valve stem is pretty critical for how the replica functions when you're using it. With the Pulsar as well as many other engines, it is recommended to run with maxed out volume. That is, the valve stem has to remain forward biased, i.e. open, for so long time that the BB has maxed out on speed, and any more time on the valve won't increase FPS. Why? Well, because it's unstable. Even though the solenoid behind it is accurate, the valve stem can move inconsistently. Cold weather, wear, tight O-rings, and missing or excessive grease also contributes to it moving slower or faster. It takes very little change in speed or stickiness of this part to have an effect on reliability. This is also why using the correct grease and in the right amounts is critical for the stability. Over-greasing it would cause it to stick. Also, if you're playing in cold weather, you could consider using a very thin silicone oil instead, but that's not official Gate advice. It could be interesting to experiment with improving this part. For example, a lower flow version, which then requires a higher pressure, resulting in more reliable operation. Something similar also exists for Pulsar. If you are a person who toys around with HPA engines, let me know in the comments what ideas you have. And also, if you like this video, subscribe and you get to see more of it. And definitely let me know in the comments what you think. Given that the nozzle forward strength is spring-based, it might be possible to fine-tune this strength by replacing the spring. That shouldn't be too difficult for a tech to do. Also, this hole here is the output hole for the nozzle air chamber. When the nozzle spring pushes the nozzle forward, this piston also has to be forced forward, and it has to empty the pressured air back out through here. In theory, it could be possible to decrease the hole size, thereby restricting the airflow and causing the nozzle to go forward slower. That may help with BB placement consistency, but also cause issues for higher rate of fire. It's worth looking into, especially for people primarily shooting semi-auto. So if you got some skills out there with 3D printing or whatever, it could be fun to try. Lubricating the engine does require some finesse. Use too much grease or the wrong grease and it can impact accuracy and stability. You shouldn't really need to grease it that often. If the engine is new out of box, leave it as it is. If you do want to grease it, I actually designed my own HPA optimized grease. There's more information about the individual greases in the link in the description, so check that out. Oh, and if you like what I do, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments. That helps me putting out more of the good content. The tablet plate you can grease with a thin coat of the low friction grease or silicone oil. Treat this like a normal tablet plate really. A critical point is between the cylinder stem and the nozzle. If you play a lot outdoors, this is the one you'll want to clean and re-grease every now and then. The BB stack pressure on the nozzle will cause a high friction point here. So I recommend at least the low friction grease, and even better, the silicone-free one, as that's a heavier grease for metal-on-metal contact. The main valve part is also critical to lube correctly. Here I recommend using the low friction grease. It's similar to the grease used by Gate and has a PTFE additive that helps lower the stiction issues. If you're playing in cold weather, like under 0 degrees Celsius, you could also consider switching to an even thinner lubricant like the oils. Regardless of what you use, you have to make sure that these 2 areas are clean of grease and oil. That is, the front area here and the rear area here. This is to prevent any stiction during operation. So be very careful and use only a super tiny amount of lube. Moving on to the tappet plate piston, here you can use the low friction grease and again in only very small amounts. For the O-rings on the two solenoids, it is Gate's official recommendation to not lube them at all. I would recommend following that as the O-rings here are stationary. What do I like about the Pulsar D2 engine? Well, I wouldn't say it's easy to install, but you can install it without too much custom work. The spring guide fits behind it without any modifications. The manual for install and setup is very good. There's a lot of parts included to install the engine, including extra nozzle lengths, and that is a nice touch. I actually ended up using the included nozzle and it shot very well. The stock settings work out of box for 90% of people, maybe except the main valve time. It feeds and shoots well. It's as close to the original AG as any HPA replacement engine could hope to be. People who buy this engine should have a good result, and that is an incredibly important point. Once you're in the menu, it's easy and straightforward to actually mess with the settings. DTU is a Titan 2, which by now has a lot of testing and development done for fitment. It also works with the Gate Tactica, and that's a nice touch because it doesn't fit with all ETUs. Being able to run different profiles on the FCU. For example, if it's cold, you could have the full auto option also be semi, but with an increase in the main valve time as a backup in case it's too cold for normal operation. That's a smart little trick. What don't I like about the engine? Well, I don't like having to use a phone and a Gate app and the whole interface. It works, but I prefer something much more simple and reliable. There's also no longer an up-to-date PC app, so you actually really have to use the phone. It's not too loud in any way, but it is louder than most other engines. Even tuned down and running a big suppressor, you can hear it. The open bolt mode isn't actually open bolt, it just switches the procedure around. It's technically always a closed bolt. The wiring of the top wire across the ETU is annoying. If you're not careful, it could interfere with the tappet plate. It's not a problem though. The issue with the tappet plate can throw you for a loop. It seems like a stupid mistake, and I don't understand why Gate has not at least communicated something about it, telling people to loosen the screw or use a longer screw, having to drill out the tappet holes for it to fit. From a manufacturing perspective, trying to make those two holes fit precisely with all gearboxes is impossible, so locking the engine's backwards movement has to be done in a different manner. For example, a stick that goes against the cylinder window. That's just my opinion. At one point, when I connected the Gate app to adjust, the firmware update process suddenly started by itself. Perhaps I hit a pop-up that I didn't see, but the firmware update should not happen like that. You could end up with a non-working gun in the field while adjusting something. I don't like that Gate recommends to always run it over volumed for best FPS stability. But on the other hand, this is just how all HPA engines work. Well, except those with direct solenoid valves. There's only 3 selection options. For a product this complex, it would have been nice to have 4 or 5 selection positions. So overall, this is one of the better working engines in the market now, and I would be comfortable recommending this as a product to someone wanting to get into HPA. If you're new to working on AEGs or with HPA, I would still recommend getting a tech to install it. It's not easy enough for newbies to do. It's very important to highlight that this engine shoots reliably and accurate out of the box, at least in my testing, which is a very important, fundamentally different achievement that I would normally only reserve for the Wolf engine. It's also somewhat cheaper, especially if you're upgrading from a previous Pulsar engine and already have a Titan 2 installed.